Beneath the golden sands of South Africa lies Thulamela, a forgotten city that once ruled with unimaginable wealth, spiritual wisdom, and royal majesty. But what happened to this mysterious kingdom, and why was it buried for centuries, hidden from the world? In this gripping documentary, we unearth ancient tombs, decode spiritual rituals, and follow the rise and fall of a lost African dynasty. Beneath the sweltering sun and golden sands of South Africa, something ancient stirs. Hidden under the surface of Kruger National Park lies a secret most people have never heard. A lost city, once pulsing with life, gold, and power. A kingdom that defied the usual stories of Africa's past, until its silence was broken by a royal tomb that whispered of rulers, rituals, and riches. This is Thulamela, a name erased from textbooks yet carved into the bones of the continent. But how could a civilization so wealthy, so advanced, and so connected to the outside world simply vanish? What caused its fall, and why was it hidden for so long? The story begins not with gold or kings, but with a team of archaeologists stumbling upon strange stone walls atop a ridge. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a scattered collection of rocks. But buried beneath the earth were secrets that would rewrite African history. Royal graves, gold ornaments, sacred beads, an undeniable proof that this kingdom was a hub of commerce, spirituality, and royal prestige. How far did Thulamela's influence stretch? What kind of people walked its stone corridors, prayed in its sanctuaries, or ruled from its throne? And why do so few outside of Southern Africa even know it existed? In this documentary, we'll travel deep into the lost city, following in the footsteps of ancient royalty and the modern explorers who brought their story back to life. We'll uncover the stunning artifacts they left behind, the mystical rituals they practiced, and the complex systems of trade, diplomacy, and power that shaped their world. We'll also explore a darker question. Why was Thulamela never part of the history we were taught? And how does its rediscovery challenge the myths about pre-colonial Africa? This isn't just a tale of ruins and dust. It's a story of innovation, resilience, and a royal bloodline determined to be remembered. A story of people who thrived long before European ships ever touched the African coast. So buckle in, because the kingdom beneath the sand is about to rise, and it's unlike anything you've ever heard. In the early 1990s, nestled within the rolling hills of Kruger National Park, a team of archaeologists stumbled upon something peculiar, something that didn't quite fit the expected landscape of wildlife and wilderness. It wasn't animal bones or colonial debris, it was stone. Perfectly arranged stone walls stretching across a ridge, hinting at a design far too deliberate to be natural. Something ancient had once stood here. At first, it was dismissed by some as an old cattle kraal or a forgotten farmer's outpost. But as researchers dug deeper, literally and historically, they realized they had uncovered the remains of a once thriving city. A city so well planned, it revealed neighborhoods, enclosures, and ceremonial spaces. This wasn't just a village, it was a capital, a forgotten metropolis hidden in plain sight. Then came the real revelation, the graves. Archaeologists uncovered royal burial sites beneath stone cairns. The bodies were buried in a sitting position, adorned with gold beads, bangles, and decorative items that had no local origin. The gold was pure, handcrafted, and aged. This was a dynasty, and it had traded far and wide. Pottery fragments bore marks that resembled East African Swahili designs. Some objects hinted at Indian Ocean trade connections. The people of Thulamela had clearly interacted with a much wider world, exchanging goods, culture, and power across vast distances. But even beyond the artifacts, something else captured the archaeologists' imaginations: the layout of the city. Defensive walls, lookout posts, sacred areas. Everything was intentional. Thulamela had been a powerful, organized society with structure, strategy, and status. Local oral histories began to make more sense. For centuries, communities in the region had whispered of a powerful city in the hills, one with kings and queens, one buried by time and drought. These stories, once dismissed as myth, were finally validated by the stones and soil. And so, what began as a casual discovery quickly evolved into one of the most significant archaeological finds in southern Africa. Thulamela wasn't just real, it was royal, and its unearthing posed a direct challenge to the long-standing notion that sub-Saharan Africa lacked complex civilizations before colonial contact. But this was only the beginning, because what was found in the graves was just a taste of what Thulamela had been. The real story, the rise of a kingdom, was still waiting to be told. To understand the rise of Thulamela, we must first grasp its geography. Perched strategically in the far northeast corner of modern-day South Africa, near the banks of the Limpopo River, Thulamela was perfectly positioned. This location placed it at the crossroads of major trade routes, stretching from the interior of Africa to the Swahili coast and beyond. Its altitude offered defense, its proximity to water enabled agriculture, and its mineral-rich surroundings, especially gold, made it irresistible to traders and kings alike. Thulamela didn't emerge from nothing. It was built upon a long legacy of southern African kingdoms that had mastered metallurgy, astronomy, and architecture long before contact with Europe. But what made Thulamela stand out was its connection to transcontinental trade. This was a place where Arab traders, Indian merchants, and African elites exchanged goods, ideas, and influences. Imagine walking through its stone-lined streets during its peak in the 13th to 17th centuries. You would find goldsmiths working delicate designs into jewelry, spiritual leaders preparing rituals, and elite families organizing political alliances. You might even hear foreign languages, proof that Thulamela wasn't isolated but deeply woven into the fabric of global trade networks. At the heart of the kingdom stood its ruling class, not tyrants but custodians of land, spirituality, and justice. The rulers of Thulamela, both men and women, held sacred power, believed to communicate with ancestors and the gods. They were buried not just with wealth but with purpose, their tombs aligned with celestial patterns, their relics chosen with ritual care. But the everyday people of Thulamela also thrived. Farmers cultivated millet and sorghum in the valleys, herders grazed cattle on the plateaus, and artisans shaped clay and stone into tools and vessels. These were not primitive tribes, but organized communities with social hierarchies, economies, and systems of belief. The city was divided into functional areas: residential compounds, working zones, and sacred spaces. Archaeological evidence shows planned construction, with distinct housing units, granaries, and even pathways laid out between them. Thulamela had urban design, centuries before modern city planning. Its wealth wasn't just measured in gold, but in influence. Thulamela's rulers were power brokers, mediators in regional politics, key players in the movement of goods and knowledge. It was a beacon of African civilization, rising not in isolation but as a radiant node in a global web. And yet, for all its brilliance, the city was still vulnerable, because even the mightiest kingdoms can fall. If the stones of Thulamela whisper stories, the royal tombs scream them. Their discovery was more than archaeological, it was spiritual. Hidden beneath carefully constructed cairns, the graves of Thulamela's elite were a revelation. They confirmed what oral tradition had preserved for centuries. This was a seat of kings and queens, a sacred center of leadership, culture, and legacy. The most famous tomb uncovered belonged to a woman, likely a queen or spiritual leader, buried upright, wrapped in a shroud of gold beads and finely crafted bangles. This wasn't accidental. In Thulamela, royalty was not defined solely by gender, but by lineage, ritual power, and status. Women held enormous influence in spiritual and political life, often acting as oracles, advisors, and rulers in their own right. The gold found in the tombs was more than ornament. It was symbolic. Gold in Thulamela represented divine favor and connection to the ancestors. These were not baubles for vanity, but tools for transcendence, used in rituals to communicate with the spiritual realm. The weight and design of each artifact had meaning. The beads were prayer tools, the bangles were power symbols. The burial position itself, a seated pose, suggested authority, reflection, and readiness for eternal counsel. But it wasn't just gold that spoke. Beads from India, cowries from the Indian Ocean, and ceramics of Swahili origin showed just how interconnected this kingdom truly was. Thulamela was never a backwater. It was cosmopolitan, spiritual, and respected across the continent. And the tombs revealed more than riches. They told us about how Thulamela understood death, not as an ending, but as elevation. Royals were not buried out of sight. They were placed high above the city, overlooking the valley, watching their people even in death. The site itself was selected for its proximity to the sky, to the ancestors, to the stars. In Thulamela cosmology, the afterlife wasn't beneath the ground. It was in the wind, in the sun, in the hills. The discovery of these tombs fundamentally challenged the long-standing view that southern African civilizations lacked complexity or spiritual depth. It dismantled colonial myths. These graves held not just bones, but pride, power, proof. Thulamela's dynasty, long buried, was regal in every sense. Their lives were written in gold, and their silence for centuries was enforced, not natural. Because when power speaks from beneath the earth, it shakes the foundations of the stories we were told. No kingdom lasts forever, not even one as rich, as revered, or as rooted in the land as Thulamela. Its fall was not marked by fire or war, but by silence, a slow, steady retreat from power. And to this day, no one can say with certainty what truly caused the kingdom to vanish beneath the sands. One theory points to climate. Archaeological data suggests that a severe drought swept through southern Africa during the later years of Thulamela's existence. The once reliable Limpopo may have run dry, crops withered, cattle died, trade faltered, and without sustenance or surplus, even a mighty kingdom can collapse from within. Another possibility is conflict. Oral traditions from surrounding communities hint at invasions. Groups migrating southward, pushing through the region with hunger and desperation of their own. Perhaps Thulamela's defenses couldn't withstand the weight of external pressure, or maybe internal power struggles fractured the unity of the royal house. Economic decline is another suspect. As trade routes shifted and new powers emerged on the Swahili coast, Thulamela may have been bypassed. Like many ancient cities, its glory could have faded not with a bang, but a redirection. Trade caravans found newer hubs, alliances dissolved, and Thulamela, once the jewel of a network, found itself isolated. But perhaps the most haunting reason lies in the realm of narrative. When colonial historians arrived in Africa, they weren't just looking for land, they were looking to control the story. The idea of a sophisticated African kingdom didn't fit their model, so Thulamela, like many others, was buried twice, once by time and once by intent. Local communities remember, though. They speak of the Great Hill, the sacred stones, the ancestors who watch from above. They tell of a queen who still guards her people in spirit, and of a city that chose to hide when the world was no longer safe. Thulamela's fall wasn't simply an end. It was a transition, a choice, perhaps, to retreat into the earth until the world was ready to hear its truth again. And now that world is listening. But before we close the story, we must ask, what does Thulamela leave behind? The bones have been studied, the gold catalogued, the ruins mapped. But Thulamela's true legacy cannot be measured in artifacts. Its greatest inheritance is a challenge, an invitation to rethink everything we thought we knew about Africa's past. For centuries, the dominant narrative painted Africa as a continent without history. Colonial textbooks erased civilizations like Thulamela, Mapungubwe, and Great Zimbabwe, replacing them with silence or with stories of tribes that lived in ignorance before European contact. This wasn't an accident, it was strategy. Erasure served empire. But Thulamela defies erasure. Its ruins tell a different story, a story of kings and queens, of diplomacy, of global trade long before colonial ships arrived. Its architecture shows planning and permanence. Its tombs speak of philosophy, cosmology, and reverence for life after death. Every stone, every bead, every buried blade speaks not just to the past, but to the dignity that was denied. And yet, Thulamela is still largely unknown. School children across the globe learn about the pyramids of Egypt, the roads of Rome, the temples of the Maya. But they do not learn about Thulamela. Not because it is less important, but because it is less told. That silence is being broken. Today, South African archaeologists, historians, and cultural leaders are working to restore Thulamela's voice. Exhibitions are emerging, documentaries are being made, local communities are reclaiming their right to remember. The site is now part of heritage tours in Kruger National Park, not as a footnote but as a focal point, and Thulamela does not stand alone. It is part of a larger African narrative linked by trade, blood, and culture to Mapungubwe, Great Zimbabwe, and even the far-reaching Swahili states. It's a reminder that Africa's story is not one of isolation but of interconnectedness, innovation, and influence. More than that, Thulamela stands as a mirror. It reflects the costs of forgetting, the politics of memory, and the importance of who gets to tell history. It reminds us that power can be buried, but never destroyed. In remembering Thulamela, we do more than resurrect a city. We restore truth. We restore pride. Because the story of Thulamela isn't just African history, it's world history, long hidden, now revealed. Thulamela is more than a ruin. It is a testament, a city that rose in the heart of southern Africa, wielding power, wealth, and spiritual wisdom, then vanished beneath the silence of centuries. But silence does not mean absence, and what is buried is never truly gone. The secrets unearthed from the stone walls and sacred tombs tell a story that was almost lost, a story of a royal civilization that thrived not in isolation but in conversation with the world. Its kings and queens ruled with both political might and spiritual grace. Its citizens lived in structured communities, creating wealth through trade, art, and agriculture. Its connections spanned oceans. Its memory lingered in the wind. Thulamela forces us to question, how many more kingdoms have we forgotten? How many stories were deliberately buried not by time but by design? Today, as researchers dig deeper and voices rise louder, Thulamela is no longer just a name whispered in oral tales. It is a symbol of pride, of resistance, of reawakening. It reminds us that African civilizations were not primitive, they were powerful. That African knowledge was not lost, it was silenced. We now stand in a time where that silence is being broken. The bones of Thulamela have begun to speak not just to archaeologists, but to the descendants of its rulers, to the people of the continent, and to a global audience ready to hear what history forgot. But this is only one story, one city, one legacy. Countless others remain beneath the sand, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Because when we uncover forgotten kingdoms, we're not just discovering what came before, we're deciding what comes next. We're rewriting the map of human history, and we're reclaiming the dignity that was always there, just hidden. So next time you hear someone say, "Africa has no history," tell them about Thulamela. And if this story moved you, challenged you, or opened your eyes, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and join us as we bring more buried truths back into the light. Because this is just the beginning.